My name is Abigail Bennett, but most people call me Abby. For almost 5 years, I believed I had learned how to survive inside the Whitmore family without losing myself completely. I knew which subjects not to bring up at dinner, which tone made my husband Ethan retreat into silence, and which smile his mother. That Wednesday evening in November, I came home from a 12-hour shift at the hospice center with an ultrasound photo tucked inside my purse. I had planned to tell Ethan first. I imagined him standing in the kitchen, tired from work, maybe confused for 1 second before the news settled into joy. I had even practiced the words in my car before walking inside. But Ethan was late, and Marjorie was already there. She had a key, of course. Marjorie always had a key. She said it was for emergencies, though somehow every emergency involved her standing in my kitchen, opening drawers, rearranging mail, or asking questions no mother-in-law had the right to ask. I set my purse on the counter for less than a minute. When I turned back, she was holding the envelope from my doctor's office. I still remember the way her face changed. Not shock, not surprise, something colder than both. She slid the black and white image from the envelope and stared at it like it was evidence. "Marjorie," I said, reaching for it. "That's private." She did not hand it back. Instead, she placed the ultrasound on the kitchen island, pressed one finger against the tiny shape on the paper, and looked at me with a calm that made my stomach tighten. "That's not my grandchild," she said. For a moment, the whole house seemed to stop breathing. Please subscribe to support the channel. I bet you're watching this video right now while lying down with your legs crossed, right? If that's true, type 3. If not, type 4. Let's see whether I got it right. Alright, enough talking. Let's begin the story. I had expected questions. I had expected judgment. But I had not expected the woman who called herself a Christian grandmother to look at my unborn child as if it were a stain she needed removed. I stood there with my hands still half raised, the way a person does when the body has reacted before the mind knows what to do. Marjorie's words did not strike me all at once. They slipped in slowly, cold and quiet, while the refrigerator hummed behind her and the kitchen clock kept ticking, as if nothing sacred had just been insulted in front of me. That house in Cary had always been beautiful from the outside. White brick, dark shutters, 2 maple trees in the yard, the kind of place people at church called a blessing. But I had learned early in my marriage that a house could be beautiful and still never feel safe. It was not really mine. It belonged to the Whitmore Family Trust, which meant it belonged to Marjorie in every way that mattered. Ethan and I paid utilities, repairs, groceries, insurance, and all the invisible expenses that made daily life run. But the walls answered to her. She had chosen the curtains before I moved in. She kept the appliance warranties in the laundry room. She knew where every spare key was kept, which drawer held the checkbooks, and which cabinet I used for medicine. Ethan always told me not to take it personally. "Mom's just organized," he would say, already tired of defending a boundary he had no intention of setting. "She's been managing family things forever." But Marjorie had a gift for making control look like responsibility. She never told me I did not belong. She simply rearranged my things until I felt like a guest. She never called me irresponsible. She only asked whether hospice nurses were trained to understand long-term money decisions, then smiled like it was a harmless question. For years, I swallowed those little humiliations because I thought peace was something a wife was supposed to protect. I told myself Ethan loved me quietly. I told myself Marjorie was lonely, aging, too attached to her only son. I told myself mature women did not turn every small wound into a war. But standing in that kitchen, with the ultrasound lying between us like something on trial, I finally understood what I had been refusing to see. Marjorie had never been trying to share a family with me. She had been waiting for a reason to remove me from hers. Marjorie let the silence sit for a moment, then picked up her phone and called Ethan. She did not explain anything to me. She did not ask how far along I was, whether I was scared, whether I had already heard the heartbeat. She simply turned her back, spoke into the phone, and said, "You need to come home now. There is something about Abby's pregnancy we need to discuss. Ethan arrived 40 minutes later, still wearing his work badge, his coat open, his expression careful in the way it always became when his mother had already decided the mood of the room. I looked at him and waited for my husband to appear, not Marjorie's son. Not the man who measured every sentence against her reaction. My husband. The father of the child I was carrying. But Marjorie spoke first. She told him she had found the ultrasound. She said there were questions. She said a family had the right to protect its name. Ethan looked from her to me, then down at the floor near his shoes. "Abby," he said softly, "maybe we should slow down and figure out what's true." "What's true?" I said. "I'm pregnant, Ethan. That is what's true." He did not come closer. Marjorie walked into the hallway and returned with a white kitchen trash bag. Inside were clothes pulled from the laundry room, my work sneakers, a cardigan, and the bottle of prenatal vitamins I had hidden behind the allergy medicine. Seeing that bottle in a trash bag did something to me. It was not loud cruelty. It was practical cruelty, the kind that had already made room for itself. "You can stay somewhere else until this is sorted," Ethan said. I stared at him. "You're letting her throw me out?" He flinched at the word throw, as if language, not betrayal, had made the moment ugly. Marjorie opened the front door. The porch light spread across the entryway and onto the bag at my feet. "No woman carrying another man's child sleeps under my roof," she said. I picked up the bag because there was nothing else left for me to pick up. My purse was on my shoulder. The ultrasound was inside it again. Ethan did not touch me. He did not say my name. He only stood there, silent, while I walked into the November cold. I drove without a plan and ended up in the back lot of WakeMed, where I had once sat with families at 3 in the morning and told them their loved ones were not alone. That night, I locked the doors, reclined my seat, and placed one hand over my stomach. The hospital windows glowed above me, warm and unreachable. I had spent years helping strangers die with dignity. And there I was, carrying new life, learning how little dignity my own family believed I deserved. For a while, I did nothing. I sat there in the back lot with the engine off, listening to the faint rush of cars on New Bern Avenue and the occasional ambulance turning into the emergency entrance. My hands were cold, but I kept one of them over my stomach anyway, as if my palm could build a wall between my child and what had just happened. At some point after midnight, my phone buzzed. I thought it might be Ethan. Some apology. Some sentence that began with, "I'm sorry." I panicked. It was not Ethan. It was an automatic bank notification. A transfer had been completed. I opened the banking app with a kind of numb curiosity, not yet afraid because fear requires you to understand what you are looking at. 2 days earlier, our joint checking account had held $28,400. Not a fortune, but enough to cover the mortgage expenses, medical bills, groceries, the kind of safety married people tell themselves they have built together. Now the balance was $112. I stared at the number until it blurred. There were 3 transfers, all made that evening, all after Marjorie had found the ultrasound and before Ethan had arrived home. The total was $26,900, moved into an account I did not recognize. My name was not on it. I knew that before I even clicked for details. Something inside me went very still. Anger would have been easier. Anger gives you heat. This was colder. This was the moment my mind stopped asking why they had hurt me and began asking how long they had been planning to. I thought back to the past few months, to Marjorie, asking, too casually, whether I had ever heard from Julian Voss anymore. Julian, my first husband, a man I had not spoken to in years. I remembered Ethan, standing in the garage, with his phone pressed to his ear, lowering his voice when I opened the door. I remembered Marjorie, mentioning Seattle at Sunday lunch, then correcting herself so quickly that I almost believed I had imagined it. I remembered letters missing from the mail tray, Ethan saying the postal service had been unreliable lately, Marjorie offering to handle paperwork because I worked such long shifts. Each memory had looked harmless when it stood alone. Together, they had shape. Nobody drains an account that fast because they are shocked by a pregnancy. Nobody packs prenatal vitamins into a trash bag and moves money before the night is even over unless they already know what they are doing. The baby was not the reason. The baby was the excuse. By sunrise, I had stopped shaking. That is not the same thing as being calm. Calm has softness in it. What I felt was harder, flatter, like a door inside me had closed and locked. I drove to Serena Holt's apartment just after 7 because she was the only person I trusted enough to see me before I had figured out what story I was supposed to tell. Serena opened the door in scrubs, took one look at my face, and stepped aside without asking a single question. I slept for 2 hours on her couch and woke to the smell of coffee and rain tapping against the windows. My phone was on the coffee table, plugged into a charger Serena must have found while I was out. There were no messages from Ethan. Not one. But at 10:18, an unfamiliar Seattle number lit up the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then some small, stubborn part of me answered. "Is this Abigail Bennett?" a woman asked. Her voice was careful, professional, and strangely relieved. "Yes. My name is Naomi Pike. I'm an attorney with Pike and Ellery Trust Counsel in Seattle. I've been trying to reach you regarding the estate of Julian Voss." For a second, the room tilted. Julian's name belonged to another life. We had been married young, from 2011 to 2015, and ended quietly, without children, without hatred. He had moved west after the divorce and built a company that handled hospital record systems. I had not spoken to him in years. "What about Julian?" I asked. There was a pause, gentle but practiced. "I'm very sorry to tell you this over the phone, Miss Bennett, but Julian passed away in September." I sat up slowly. Serena, across the kitchen, went still. Naomi continued. Julian had created a revocable trust years earlier and amended it shortly before his death. I was named as the primary individual beneficiary. The total value, after business proceeds, real estate holdings, and investment accounts, was estimated at $43.6 million. I did not speak. I could hear my own breathing. "There is one condition," Naomi said. "You must appear in person at our Seattle office within 45 days of formal notice to verify your identity and sign documents accepting your role as sponsor for the Elise Voss Memorial Nursing Scholarship." "Elise?" I whispered. "Julian's younger sister. She died before you met him. He wanted the fund connected to healthcare workers." Then Naomi added that her office had mailed notices to the Whitmore residents twice. Both went unanswered. I looked at my phone, then at the rain on Serena's window, and understood the shape of the thing more clearly than ever. They had not thrown me out because I was worthless. They had thrown me out because they were terrified I was about to find out I was not. I did not tell Serena the number at first. It felt too large to say out loud in her small kitchen, between the chipped blue mugs and the dish towel hanging over the oven handle. I only told her Julian was gone, that his lawyer needed me in Seattle, and that the Whitmores had somehow received mail meant for me, and said nothing. Serena listened the way good nurses listen, not with shock, but with attention. Then she pushed a notebook across the table and said, "Write down everything, while it's fresh." So I did. The time Marjorie found the ultrasound. The time Ethan came home. The trash bag. The bank transfer notification. Naomi Pike's call. The unanswered notices. Every detail went onto paper, not because I knew yet what it would become, but because documentation was the only language powerful people could not easily twist. That afternoon, Serena drove me to a small office off Glenwood Avenue to meet Vivienne Cross, a family law attorney whose name I knew from a patient's daughter years earlier. Vivienne was in her early 50s, silver hair cut to her jaw, no wedding ring, no softness wasted on performance. She read my notes without interrupting. When she reached the part about the account balance, her eyes lifted for the first time. "Do not call your husband," she said. "Do not text his mother. Do not go back to that house alone." She made copies of my bank screenshots, the call log from Naomi, and the ultrasound paperwork still folded inside my purse. Then she asked where I kept my passport, social security card, medical records, laptop, and work credentials. The answer was the same for almost all of them. The house. Vivienne leaned back. Then we get your property back legally, and we move to freeze any further transfers. Tonight, you change every password you have. By 5 o'clock, I had a new email account, a locked folder of screenshots, and a list of things I was not allowed to do even if fear made them tempting. Serena took a photo of me sitting at her kitchen table in the same clothes I had worn when I left the Whitmore house, my hospital badge still clipped crookedly to my sweater. "Not for pity," she said, "for the timeline." The next morning, Dr. Mara Ellison fit me into her schedule before clinic hours. She confirmed the pregnancy dates, printed the records, and squeezed my hand once before letting go. "Whatever they're saying," she said, "the chart will say what happened." For the first time since Marjorie opened that front door, I felt something steadier than panic. I did not have my house. I did not have my money. I did not even have all my documents. But I had witnesses now, and witnesses meant the truth had somewhere to stand. Please subscribe to support the channel. I bet your phone battery is at 27% right now, right? If that's true, type 1. If not, type 2. Let's see whether I got it right. All right, enough talking. Let's begin the story. The rumors reached me before Ethan did. 3 days after I saw Dr. Ellison, while I was sitting at Serena's kitchen table sorting medical forms into the folder Vivienne had given me, my phone lit up with a message from a woman named Bethany Cole, someone I knew only from church potlucks and Christmas donation drives. She wrote, "Abby, I don't want to get involved, but people are saying things about your baby. I thought you should know." I read it twice, then set the phone down very carefully. There are messages that hurt because of what they say. This one hurt because of what it confirmed. Marjorie had not been satisfied with putting me out of the house. She wanted the world outside that house to believe I deserved it. By that afternoon, Serena had heard a version of it from a nurse whose sister attended Marjorie's Bible study group. According to the story being passed from one polite mouth to another, Ethan had been struggling privately for years, and I had taken advantage of his kindness. The words were soft, church-safe, wrapped in concern and prayer requests, but the meaning was filthy and clear. Marjorie was telling people my child could not be Ethan's. I sat very still while Serena repeated what she had heard. Not because I was calm, but because there is a kind of humiliation that makes movement feel impossible. It was one thing for Marjorie to hate me in her kitchen. It was another thing for her to carry my unborn child into rooms full of women who would lower their voices, touch their pearls, and call cruelty discernment. Vivienne's response was immediate. "Send me the screenshots," she said. "Names, dates, exact wording. Do not defend yourself online. Do not call anyone from that church. Let them talk themselves into the record." Dr. Ellison moved just as quickly. She printed a written confirmation of the gestational timeline, clinical and clean, with no emotion for Marjorie to argue with. The dates matched the period Ethan and I were living together as husband and wife. There was nothing vague about it, nothing convenient, nothing that could be softened into gossip. Then, Vivienne raised the question I had been avoiding. "A prenatal paternity test is available," she said. "It is your choice, but if they continue making this accusation, objective proof may stop the bleeding." I hated that I had to consider it. I hated that my child's first public defense might be paperwork. But by then I understood something about people like Marjorie. They did not stop because you were wounded. They stopped when the wound became evidence. So I agreed. When the result came back, Vivienne called first. Her voice was even, but I heard the steel under it. "Ethan is the biological father." I closed my eyes. I did not feel relief exactly. I had never doubted my own life. What I felt was grief sharpened into proof. Marjorie had called my baby a sin in front of everyone, and now my baby was the first witness against her. The confirmation should have ended the ugliest part of it. That was what I wanted to believe. I wanted to imagine Vivienne sending the result to Ethan's attorney, Ethan reading it, Marjorie losing whatever moral ground she had invented for herself, and the whole poisonous thing going quiet. But people who build power from lies do not usually stop when the truth appears. They simply move the lie somewhere else. 2 days after the paternity result, I called Cora Voss. I had not spoken to Julian's younger sister in almost 10 years. The last time had been after the divorce, when she mailed me a small box of photographs Julian had forgotten to pack. I remembered her as kind, artistic, a little guarded, the sort of woman who noticed colors before she noticed status. When she answered, her voice was older but unmistakably hers. "Abby," she said softly, "I wondered if you would call." That sentence told me more than I wanted to know. I told her Julian's attorney had reached me. I told her I was sorry about his passing, sorry that grief had arrived tangled in legal papers and family cruelty. Cora was quiet for a moment, then said Julian had been ill longer than most people knew. He had kept his circle small near the end. That sounded like him. Julian had always preferred silence to performance. Then I asked the question I had written down 3 times before dialing. "Cora, did anyone contact you after Julian died asking about me?" The line went still. "A woman called in October," she said finally. "Older, polite, Southern, maybe. She said she was writing a memorial piece about tech founders who had contributed to healthcare systems. It sounded legitimate enough at first. My hand tightened around the phone. What did she ask? At first, about Julian's company, then about his estate, whether he had children, whether he had remarried, whether he had left anything to a former spouse. Cora paused. Then, she asked if Abigail Bennett was still living in North Carolina. I looked across Serena's living room at the folder on the coffee table, the one already thick with screenshots, bank records, medical proof, and notes written in my own tight handwriting. "Did she give a name?" "No," Cora said. And afterward, I felt strange about it. Memorial writers don't usually care where an ex-wife lives. No, they do not. When I hung up, the room seemed very quiet. Not empty quiet, assembled quiet. The kind that comes when separate pieces finally agree to become a picture. Marjorie had not reacted to my pregnancy. She had been preparing for my inheritance. Once Cora told me about the call, Vivienne stopped treating Marjorie as a loud, meddling mother-in-law and started treating her as part of a financial pattern. That was the phrase she used, and financial pattern. It sounded clean, almost harmless, until you understood what it meant. It meant motive. It meant preparation. It meant the cruelty had paperwork behind it. Vivienne brought in Martin Hale, a forensic accountant with gray hair, square glasses, and the tired patience of a man who had spent 30 years watching respectable people hide ugly things in neat columns. He did not ask me how I felt. He asked for dates, account numbers, tax returns, shared credit cards, insurance statements, and any device Ethan might have used for family business. I gave him everything I could reach. What Martin found did not arrive like a thunderclap. It arrived in pieces, each one small enough that Ethan could have explained it away if it had stood alone. In August, Ethan had searched Julian Voss's name 4 times in 1 week. In September, the week after Julian died, he searched revocable trust beneficiary spouse rights and inheritance during marriage North Carolina. In October, he opened articles about separate property, divorce timing, and whether a spouse could claim money left by a former husband. The searches were not emotional. They were practical. Specific. Hungry. Then Martin found the debt. Ethan's medical equipment territory had not been performing the way he told people it was. A distribution deal with a regional surgical group had collapsed quietly in the summer, and his business partner, Preston Shaw, had covered part of the loss personally. There were emails between them, not dramatic, not criminal on their own, but desperate in tone. Ethan needed liquidity. Ethan needed time. Ethan needed something large enough to make several problems disappear. For 3 days after Martin's report, Ethan texted me like a man rehearsing innocence. "You're letting lawyers turn this into something it isn't. My mother is scared. You know how she gets. We could still handle this privately." I did not answer those messages. I printed them. I put them in the folder. By then, I understood silence differently. Before, silence had been what Ethan used to abandon me. Now, silence was what I used to keep him from knowing where I stood. The hardest part was accepting that he had not simply failed to protect me. Failure can be weak, confused, even cowardly. This was something else. Ethan had watched his mother light the match because he needed the fire. Marjorie came to Serena's apartment on a Thursday afternoon, carrying a small leather Bible and a covered dish wrapped in a linen towel. Serena was at work. I was alone, which I knew was exactly how Marjorie preferred it. She had called from the parking lot instead of the door, her voice soft enough to sound wounded. "Abigail," she said, "I think it's time we speak as women." A month earlier, that sentence might have made me nervous. That day, it only made me reach for my phone and turn on the recorder before I opened the door. She looked smaller standing in the hallway than she had in her own house, but not weaker. Marjorie's strength had never depended on size. It lived in timing, tone, and the way she could make a demand sound like a prayer request. She stepped inside, looked once around Serena's living room, and placed the dish on the coffee table. "Chicken casserole," she said. "You need protein." I did not thank her. I sat in the armchair across from the couch and kept my phone face down beside my knee. Marjorie lowered herself carefully, Bible resting in her lap. "This has gone too far," she began. "Lawyers, tests, accusations. None of this is good for the baby." "The baby you said wasn't your grandchild," I said. Her mouth tightened, then softened again by force. I was upset. Any mother would be. Ethan was devastated, and I reacted from fear. I almost admired the construction of that sentence. She had made herself a mother, Ethan a victim, and me the weather that had caused the damage. "What do you want, Marjorie?" "I want my family whole," she said. "And I want you to understand that money changes people. Julian's money, especially. A woman in your condition should not be carrying that kind of burden alone." There it was, not the baby, not forgiveness, not reconciliation, the money. She leaned forward, hands folded over the Bible. "Ethan has experience with finances. If you allow him to help manage the trust, it would show good faith. It would show the court you are not trying to punish him. And if I refuse?" Her eyes changed first. The warmth stayed on her face, but her eyes went flat. "Then people will wonder why a wife is so determined to keep her husband away from resources that could benefit his child." I looked at her for a long moment, then asked quietly, "Did you call Cora Voss pretending to write about Julian?" The silence that followed was not long, maybe 3 seconds. But it was the first honest thing she had given me. "You have no idea what kind of family you married into," she said. "No," I replied. "I think I finally do." When she left, the casserole remained untouched on the table. I sent the recording to Vivienne before Marjorie reached the parking lot. The recording changed the temperature of the case, but discovery changed the ground beneath it. Until then, Vivienne had been building a wall out of what we could prove from the outside. Bank records, medical documents, call logs, messages, the timing of everything. Discovery opened the Whitmore side of the door, and what came through was not a misunderstanding, it was a map. The first email Vivienne showed me was from Marjorie to Ethan, sent 9 days before she found the ultrasound in my purse. The subject line was blank. The message was not, "If she gets the money before we control the situation, we lose everything." I read it once, then again. The words did not shock me the way they might have weeks earlier. By then, shock had become too expensive. What I felt was a cold, almost physical confirmation, like hearing a lock turn in a door I had already been standing in front of. There were more. Ethan asking a private attorney whether inherited money from a former spouse could become marital property if it was used for household benefit. Marjorie forwarding him a link about legal separation. Ethan writing, "If she leaves voluntarily, does that help us?" That one made Vivienne pause. "She did not leave voluntarily," she said. "And we are going to make that very clear." That was where Harold Finch entered the story. Mr. Finch lived 2 houses down from the Whitmore place. He was 73, a retired county judge with a bad hip, a clean porch, and a habit of walking his old beagle late at night, because the dog refused to respect normal schedules. He had seen me leave. More than that, he had heard enough. In his sworn statement, he described the porch light, the white trash bag, Marjorie standing at the doorway, and Ethan behind her in the hall. He remembered Marjorie's exact words because, as he put it, I spent 41 years listening carefully when people tried to dress cruelty up as principle. When I read that line, I had to put the paper down. Vivienne sent the emails, the financial transfers, the medical confirmation, the paternity result, my recording, and Mr. Finch's statement to Ethan's attorney in one clean packet. No drama, no threats, just evidence arranged in order. For the first time, the Whitmores had no room to perform innocence. Marjorie could not call it concern. Ethan could not call it confusion. They had planned, accused, transferred, and lied, and now every piece had a date attached to it. They once thought I had walked out with nothing but a purse and a trash bag. They did not understand I had walked out with the beginning of a record. Ethan's attorney asked for mediation 6 days after Vivienne sent the packet. Not because Ethan suddenly wanted peace. Peace had been available the night he stood in the hallway and watched me leave. He wanted containment. He wanted the story reduced to signatures, numbers, and a quiet agreement nobody would discuss at church or in business circles. Vivienne warned me before we went in. They will offer politeness now, she said. Do not confuse it with remorse. She was right. Ethan wore a navy suit and the exhausted expression of a man who wanted credit for suffering consequences. He did not look at my stomach. He did not look at me for long either. His lawyer did most of the talking. The money he had moved would be returned in full, including the fees and interest Martin Hale had calculated down to the dollar. Ethan would make no claim, now or later, against Julian's trust. The inheritance would remain separate property. The false statements about my pregnancy would stop immediately. The paternity result would be acknowledged in the record. There was no apology in the settlement. I had thought that would hurt more than it did. But by then, I no longer needed Ethan to name what he had done in order for it to be real. Marjorie did not attend mediation. I heard later that the trustees removed her from managing several Whitmore family accounts after questions surfaced about transfers she had authorized for Ethan. At church, people became careful around her. Not cruel, just careful. That was its own kind of punishment for a woman who had built her life on being believed. The divorce was finalized near the end of March. I walked out of the courthouse into a bright, windy afternoon with my coat open and my hands resting on the curve of my belly. I did not feel victorious. Victory sounds too loud for what that moment was. I felt free in a quiet, unfamiliar way, like a room after a machine has finally stopped humming. Nora was born in June, 7 pounds even, furious at the world and beautiful enough to make every cruel sentence ever spoken about her seem small. I gave her my last name, Bennett. The nurse placed her on my chest, and for the first time in months, my body remembered softness without fear attached to it. I bought a modest house in Raleigh with wide windows and a backyard full of weeds I decided not to hate. Later, I signed the papers for the Elise Voss Memorial Nursing Scholarship. Julian's gift became more than money. It became a door for people who wanted to care for others and needed someone to believe they could. Sometimes, in the early mornings, I hold Nora by the window and think about that night outside WakeMed. I thought I had been thrown out of my life. I had only been pushed out of a lie. People can take your keys. They can lock doors, empty accounts, and tell rooms full of strangers who they think you are. But they cannot keep you small once you have finally seen the truth. A house is not home because someone allows you to stay. Home is the place where you no longer have to beg for the right to exist. The lesson in Abby's story is not only about betrayal, money, or a cruel mother-in-law. It is about learning the difference between a house that shelters you and a family that truly protects you. Sometimes, the people closest to us use words like love, duty, marriage, and family to make us accept treatment we would never allow from a stranger. They ask for silence, and call it peace. They ask for sacrifice and call it loyalty. They hurt us, then act offended when we finally name the wound. But real love does not require you to disappear. Real family does not ask you to prove your worth, while they quietly benefit from your fear. And a person who truly loves you will not stand silently while someone else tears you down. Abby's strength did not come from suddenly becoming fearless. She was afraid. She was pregnant, alone, humiliated, and unsure of what would happen next. Her strength came from doing the next right thing anyway. She documented the truth. She trusted the right people. She stopped begging those who hurt her to understand her pain. Most importantly, she stopped confusing endurance with love. Life will sometimes push us out of places we once prayed to belong. At first, it feels like loss. But sometimes being pushed out of a lie is the beginning of being welcomed back into your own life. If this story teaches us anything, it is this: know your value before someone else tries to price it for you. Protect your peace. Keep your proof. Choose people who choose you when it costs them something. What would you have done if you were in Abby's place that night? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'd truly like to hear your perspective. And if this story touched you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to remember their worth today.